The dust of the persecutions had barely settled when the discord began simmering anew within the Church of Carthage. Bishop Mansurius and his archdeacon Caecilian had weathered the storm, but their actions during that tumultuous time would soon come back to haunt them. Mansurius had been a pragmatist, discouraging the zealous pursuit of voluntary martyrdom among his flock. And Caecilian stood accused of obstructing aid to the imprisoned confessors of the faith. Though such allegations were hard to substantiate, they spread like a malignant growth through the Christian community. In those days, the Numidians to the west looked upon their Carthaginian brethren with growing disapproval. The Numidian clergy, having endured the crucible of persecution, cast a judgmental eye on any perceived laxity or compromise. They rallied around Donatus, an outspoken priest from Cassinigree who denounced the traitors with fiery oratory. When Bishop Mansurius passed away in 311 AD, the simmering tensions boiled over into outright schism. The Carthaginian clergy hastily elected Caecilian as the new bishop, but his opponents rejected the election. They accused one of Caecilian's consecrators, Felix of Aptunga, of being a traitor, one who had handed sacred scriptures over to the Roman authorities to be burned. If true, it would invalidate Caecilian's elevation in the eyes of the zealous faction. Donatus and 70 Numidian bishops descended on Carthage, a formidable contingent determined to unseat the new bishop. In a raucous council, with a bloodthirsty mob at their backs, they declared Caecilian deposed and selected a replacement Majorinus, a mere placeholder for the charismatic Donatus himself. The lines were drawn and the Donatist schism was born. News of the controversy soon reached the court of Emperor Constantine the Great. The first Christian emperor had just secured his grip on power through his victory at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. Grateful to the Christian God, Constantine sought to establish right worship and unity throughout his domains. Any hint of disharmony in the church was cause for imperial concern. Initially, Constantine threw his weight behind Caecilian, the man on the spot in Carthage. He even ordered that clergy in communion with Caecilian be exempted from public obligations, a decision that infuriated the Donatists. They boldly petitioned the emperor, demanding that neutral judges from Gaul be appointed to settle the matter. To their surprise, Constantine agreed. In 313 AD, a special tribunal convened in Rome under the leadership of Pope Miltiades. Caecilian and 10 of his supporters squared off against an equal number of Donatists before a jury of Italian and Gallic bishops. After weighing the evidence and arguments, the tribunal ruled in favor of Caecilian. But rather than accepting this outcome, the Donatists cried foul, alleging bias and procedural irregularities. Growing exasperated, Constantine summoned a larger council to resolve the schism once and for all. In August of 314, bishops from across the Western Empire gathered in the city of Alls. This impressive synod, with attendees from as far afield as Britain, again endorsed Caecilian's legitimacy. The council also repudiated certain disciplinary practices dear to the Donatists, such as the mandatory rebaptism of clergy who had lapsed under persecution. The Donatists, thoroughly frustrated, made one final appeal to the emperor himself. In an audacious move, they sought to make Constantine the supreme arbiter of their dispute. The emperor reacted with disbelief and indignation at their stubbornness. In a scathing letter, he rebuked the schismatics and commanded their leaders be brought before him. Despite Constantine's efforts, the Donatist controversy proved intractable. Neither council nor emperor could reunite the factions. The Donatists went into open rebellion, defying imperial edicts and ecclesiastical censure alike. As their influence spread through North Africa, they began to persecute the rival Orthodox clergy with the same ferocity they themselves had once endured. Years turned to decades with no end in sight to the schism. Donatus, the grand old man of the movement, held unrivaled sway over his followers. They revered him almost as an oracle, hanging on his every word and gesture. Donatus of Carthage loomed larger than any mere bishop in the imagination of his zealous partisans. In later years, Augustine of Hippo would exert all his intellectual prowess to refute the Donatists, but theological arguments alone could not prevail against such a deeply entrenched schism. Born out of persecution, nursed by resentment, and fortified by regional pride, Donatism maintained its intransigent stance against the self-proclaimed Catholic Church of the Empire. The Donatists saw themselves as the true Church of the Martyrs, uncompromised by worldly powers and empty of traitors. They mocked their opponents for appealing to the state to enforce conformity, conveniently forgetting their own attempts to win imperial intervention. In their eyes, the Church had to be morally pure, set apart, even if that meant breaking communion with fellow Christians around the Mediterranean. As the 4th century wore on, the Donatists themselves began to fragment into rival camps. Rogatus, Maximian, and Primian arose as prominent leaders of major factions, each claiming to be the authentic standard-bearer of the Donatist cause. The Circumcellions emerged as a violent substrain of the schism, bands of extremists who sought martyrdom by any means necessary, even attacking travelers and officials in the hope of provoking a deadly response. Thus, the unity Constantine had sought to impose began to appear a distant dream. The Donatists were not the only ones rending the fabric of the Church. The Meletians in Egypt and the Arians throughout the eastern provinces also threatened to tear Christianity asunder. For all its newfound status under Constantine's favor, the Church entered the 4th century dangerously divided against itself. Like a stubborn weed, the Donatist schism would take root in the soil of North Africa and persist long after its original instigators had passed from the scene. Generations would come of age knowing only the separated churches, the rival bishops, the doctrinal recriminations. Attempts at reconciliation became increasingly futile, as the chasm of animosity and distrust continued to widen year by year. Even as the Donatists themselves lost cohesion and splintered into competing sects, they maintained their fundamental opposition to the imperial-backed Catholic Church. In a sense, Donatism evolved from a specific theological and disciplinary dispute into a deeply ingrained cultural identity. To be a Donatist was to be a true African Christian, loyal to the heritage of Cyprian and the martyrs, resistant to the meddling of foreign powers. The tide would only turn with the advent of new political realities. As the Vandals swept through North Africa in the 5th century, they showed little patience for the Donatist cause. The schism lost its protected status and found itself once again on the defensive. Slowly but surely, Donatist influence receded as the new order established itself. But even in diminished form, the Donatist spirit would linger on, a testament to the abiding power of religious zeal and regional identity. The echoes of that long-ago schism can be discerned in the Christianity of North Africa through the ages, in its distinct liturgies, its suspicion of worldly authorities, its penchant for moral rigorism. What began as a localized dispute over the legitimacy of one bishop became a defining chapter in the history of the early Church. The Donatist controversy exposed fault lines that transcended the immediate context of 4th century Carthage, the tension between purity and inclusivity, between the demands of conscience and the appeal to unity, between the prophetic spirit and institutional authority. Though the names of Donatus, Caecilian, and the other protagonists have faded into obscurity, the fundamental questions they grappled with remain as pressing as ever for the Church in every age. How to maintain communion in the face of profound disagreement. How to balance the call to holiness with the reality of human frailty. How to relate to secular powers without compromising spiritual integrity. These are the enduring legacies of the Donatist schism, the unintended gifts it bequeathed to subsequent generations. In its very intransigence and obstinacy, it exposed the limits of facile solutions and forced the Church to confront its own deepest nature. The controversies of the 4th century, though long settled as a matter of institutional history, continue to echo in the personal struggles of countless believers down to the present day. Perhaps it is the fate of the Church in every epoch to be riven by such disputes, to be stretched between the poles of purity and compromise, rigor and compassion. Perhaps it is only through navigating these perennial tensions that the people of God can truly grow into the fullness of their calling. The Donatists, for all their flaws and excesses, stand as a reminder that the quest for an uncompromised faith is never complete, nor is the yearning for a spotless bride of Christ destined to find satisfaction this side of eternity. In the end, the Donatist schism was a tragic chapter in the history of the early Church, a cautionary tale of how even the noblest ideals can lead to division and strife when pursued without charity or humility. But it was also a necessary crucible, a fiery trial that forced the Church to confront its own identity and mission in a rapidly changing world. From the ashes of that conflict emerged a chastened but more resilient Christianity, one better equipped to face the challenges of the centuries to come. And so the story of the Donatists, for all its particularity, speaks to something universal in the human experience of faith. It is a reminder that the path of discipleship is seldom straightforward, that the call to holiness is fraught with pitfalls and paradoxes. But it is also a testament to the abiding presence of the Spirit, who guides the Church through every trial and tribulation, ever renewing and refining it in the crucible of history. In the final analysis, the Donatist schism was but one moment in the long, unfinished drama of God's people struggling to embody their high calling in a fallen world. Its lessons, hard-won and easily forgotten, echo down the ages as a perennial summons to humility, charity, and hope in the face of every challenge and division. May those who study its history find in it not only a cautionary tale, but also an invitation to deeper faith and more steadfast witness.